Welcome everyone to another WealthMed property webinar. We're here today with myself, Doug Scragg, and Scott Guilford. So we wanted to get together today. As you may be aware, the market is absolutely booming at the moment, and it just feels like it's really hot, really expensive. Is it just me, or is it just what seems to be happening right now around the market? And so really, how does the property market match up in our day-to-day? So let's get cracking into it. There's a few different topics that we want to discuss today. The first one is about renting versus owning. We've been hearing a lot about whether it might be cheaper to actually own your property. The next thing is about setting yourself up for that next property purchase or your first property purchase. And lastly is about the chaos in the construction industry. There's a lot going on that has a big impact to anyone that's building currently. So let's get stuck into it. Scott, with owning versus renting, how does this work? How are you actually able to save money by owning your property versus by renting something in the market?
Yeah, well, we've been talking about this a long time, and you've probably heard Carolyn or one of the advisors in here saying, you know, it's actually cheaper to own your property than rent it at the moment, and that's never been truer than in this current market. So what that means, we've just got a little slide here where, you know, we're comparing the same property. So let's say it's a $650,000 4-bed, 2-bath, 2-garage home. Now, are we better off renting it or owning it? So the rent on that particular home would be at least $700 a week now.
Yeah.
And as you're probably aware out there, the rental market is super hot. We've talked about that before. To own that property, we're assuming we've got a 95% loan, so $617,000 loan on the property, and that's principal and interest payments. At the current variable rate's about 3.3%, 3.29 here we've got. That's going to cost you $624 a week. So obviously that's less than the $700.
It's already cheaper, yeah.
Yeah, right. And actually you can get better than that. There's some great fixed rates around. You can get down just below 2%. So that makes it about $526 a week. So that's less than the rent there. Now sure, you're probably also going to have a few rates and other expenses that you probably wouldn't have renting, but it's still, over the year, it's going to average out about the same or probably less. So you're much better off to own currently than rent. And whilst even if the numbers were the same, on one account you have a home, an asset, on the other you don't.
Yeah, it's actually yours.
That's right. So why not, right?
Rather than paying someone else's mortgage down, you're actually paying your own mortgage down. Fantastic. So that all sounds really good. I mean, how does someone plan to get in to the market, getting into their first property? It's something that we get asked a lot. And so the first starting point really is just deciding to get started. People have ideas in their heads about, you know, eventually I'll get into property one day. Really, it's just choosing to make that first move and go, yeah, it's going to happen, I'm going to do it now. And the second step is then going, well, what can I actually afford to borrow? How much does my income allow me to go for with a bank loan?
Yeah, and that's important, because a lot of people, particularly first homeowners, they'll be going around and around in circles because they're looking at homes that they probably can't actually even afford. So they haven't gone to that next step to finding out, well, how much can I afford? That's super important, because otherwise nothing's real. That's
right, and you don't know until you just start doing it. The next big thing is, well, I know I can borrow X amount of dollars, but what deposit does actually mean that I have to put in to achieve that sort of level of price point? And I think that's where people get stuck as well. They look at something that they can afford to borrow maybe, but then they only have 10 grand or 20 grand of deposit. Right. So there's a bit of a gap. So knowing what that is a critical step to actually making something happen. I think the next big thing is, and that sort of stems off the first 3 points, but locations. Being able to choose the right type of locations that fit your requirements when it comes to your borrowing capacity and your deposit. And knowing, especially in this market, I think, when those opportunities come up, because they're not just there every single day of the week. You sort of have to find them as they come along, as they come on board.
That's right, and that's our last webinar was all about that, is this being jump ready.
Yeah.
When you're ready to make a decision, jump, because otherwise you're just going to miss the boat.
That's right, there's so much competition right now, you just got to be set, ready to go, ready to pay those deposits, sign those contracts, whatever it might be.
So renting versus owning. I think we're just sort of going on from that, and the type of property becomes really important to get into. What we've just shown here is a quick example with that same $650,000 property, of one being an existing property and one being a new build, and what at the end of the day is it going to cost me to get into those? And this is something that we come across all the time. And as we've just said, that one of the biggest hurdles is your deposit. So there are ways to actually make that a little bit easier. And this one highlights it. At the end of the day, it can cost you twice as much deposit-wise to get into one property than the other. And the big difference there is that a new property, so it's a new build, can have a first homeowner's grant and it can have first homeowner concessions and the stamp duty. And that's, it doesn't sound like much, but it adds up. It's half the deposit. So, I don't know how long it takes you to save 25 odd grand, but, for some people that could be enough to miss that market and just be chasing their tail all the time. So that's something that can make a big difference, and it's worth having a look at that.
I think particularly for your first home, having $15,000 added to the deal, well, that's money that you just didn't have before. So that is a huge element.
It's worth taking advantage of.
Absolutely. So the next big thing, I guess, is, well, okay, I'm feeling good about this and I want to do something. So where do we sort of go? And this probably counts for both homeowners and investors.
Again, one of the main things that we try and do at WealthMed is set people up for what they're trying to achieve, whatever their goals and objectives are. Is set yourself up for the next move. And really this is where the finance comes into it. The finance is the glue that sticks it all together, right? So when you're going to the bank rules change a lot, and they've changed a heap over the last couple of years. So what you really want to do is set yourself up now for not just what you're doing now, but what you may be doing in the future. And so typically when we're talking about the loans, what we're talking about is, say if you're a first homeowner, you might go, how much can I borrow? And maybe there's two of you, you're a couple, right? So you've got two incomes coming in, you might be able to borrow $1 million. So that sounds great. Now we don't necessarily want to go and buy $1 million house first off. We might only be looking at sort of 500 or 550. But what we want to do is get the maximum borrowing capacity so that we're in a position, if we find the perfect house and it's 600,000, well, we can just go and get that because we know we can get it. We don't have to then, well, we've only gone for 550 and we've got to come back. And now the bank's changed the rules, so it's a little bit harder. So get yourself in a position that you're right. Another concept with that would be, okay, I've already got a property or two and I'm looking at my next property. So again, it's going for the maximum approval. It doesn't mean you're going to use it all, but you've got the ability to, so the opportunity's there. It's also, if you've got equity in a property, go for the maximum equity to draw that out, so that it's available if you want it. If you don't use it, it doesn't cost you anything. So there's no loss there, but there is an opportunity. For example, you might have 100,000 in equity that you could draw out. So you can have that sitting there, and when we go, okay, cool, you want to get an investment property that requires 65 of that. Great, so we've got an extra 35 that's sitting there unused, and it's not being used, it's not costing us anything. But down the track, where there might be an opportunity to use that again, but the bank rules have changed slightly, so if we hadn't got it then, we can't get it now. We're seeing a lot at the moment that the banking facilities are taking so much longer to grant approvals. And if you're using equity from one property as a deposit to buy another, the times are just blowing out, because we're getting a situation too where, because people are selling houses so quickly, they're pushing their timeframes for conditions to 2 weeks maximum.
They're wanting things faster in a more busy environment.
That's right. They know that, well, if I don't sell it to you, I can sell it to someone else for more tomorrow. So we're getting pushed at both ends. Sellers are constricting time, banks are expanding time, so it gets pretty difficult.
But if you're prepared on one side with the bank, then you're ready to attack it, and you're able to then jump onto those good opportunities when they present themselves.
You're the person that's got their self set up so they can jump on those opportunities, as opposed to the person that misses out because they've taken too long. Simple as that. So get yourself ready and set yourself up for that next move.
It's big. It's important.
That's really important.
I suppose one of the things that's being talked about a lot right now is chaos in the construction industry. Builders are, experiencing a whole lot of dramas when it comes to building prices. How is that actually coming about?
Yeah, so we've sort of been hit twice really, the construction industry has anyway. One is that obviously the property market's going crazy, so their demand for builders is going crazy. So how it works in a builder is sort of more like a project manager. They've got a whole heap of trades, or plumbers and carpenters and tilers, etc., and a whole lot of supplies, so the tiles, the timber, the steel, all that sort of stuff. And so what's happened, demand on both of those has just gone crazy. And that's one point. The second part that they've been hit is that supply restrictions. So with the COVID pandemic, that's actually slowed down a lot of imported stuff. For example, most of the timber for housing actually comes from Scandinavia, or in a secondary case, Asia. You know, you'd think it'd come from here or New Zealand or closer or something, but it doesn't. And so just getting that supply through has been very difficult. There's places like America apparently pays about 3 times as much for timber. So guess where all the timber's going right now?
Yep.
So there's all those strikes. So I've been hit twice on that. Demand and the restrictions on supply. So it's taking longer to get materials and it's all costing more.
So I suppose with all of that happening, you know, a lot of the builders that, you know, bigger builders versus smaller builders, is there going to be a difference between how they're going to be able to access those supplies and trades?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, a lot of the building industries like the HIA and the master builders are a bit concerned about this at the moment. We've seen a few papers that they put out about it. Because of this, a lot of the bigger players, a lot of the bigger builders and national builders, they're going to win in this, and the little guys are going to lose and potentially even go under. Mainly because the bigger guys have got access to that supply and to the trade. So if there's limited supply, you know, guess who you're going to look after? You're going to look after your biggest customers, right?
Yep.
And same with the trades. If 90% of your work comes from one builder, you're going to look after that guy rather than
Makes sense.
do you know, 1 or 2 things with a year. So you're going to find that a lot of those smaller one-off builders are going to really struggle to get trades. They're going to be super expensive, and same with materials. And that can really make a builder go under, because when they put a contract out for a price, they then have to build that property over the next 6 to 12 months. And if the pricing all changes during that time for what they've contracted it for,
Who's got to wear it?
You know, that's trouble. So you've just got to be a little bit careful about who you're picking for a builder these days.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one I thought with all of this is like, oh, if it's getting so expensive to build, you know, maybe it's not a good thing to do right now. But I think the answer to that is completely the opposite. It's like, no, it's still a good time to get in and build, despite what's happening with the building industry.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. You know, it is a time that, you know, the reason that the building is going a bit crazy is because the market's going crazy. So whilst the cost to build has increased a bit, the opportunities still out there in the market are greater still. So it's still worth it. You know, I mean, there may be a point where it just gets to that point where it's not worth it anymore, but you know, that's what we get in and judge that. So it's, but right now it's still definitely very much worth it.
That's right. I think time is always your friend. Getting in early now, so that way your assets have time to grow.
Costs aren't going to come down.
That's right.
You know, I mean, builders and suppliers, they tend to be able to sit for a while because when things are a bit quiet, they can't raise their price. You know, they're actually trying to tender for work. But so when times like this come, that's their opportunity to increase, get their 5 or 10% increase that they haven't had for the last, you know, 5 or 10 years. But they're not going down.
It could be some time before they actually do start to, you know, be more negotiable with their pricing.
Oh yeah, it's all supply and demand. You know, it's all about that.
Lovely. Well, you know, that's been the property market sort of in a nutshell, where things are at right now. That's sort of the topics that we feel the most dire to get to our clients and our customers and see how they're sort of feeling. Renting versus owning. Get into that first property. It is cheaper. It's the better way to go right now, especially if you're still not yet into your first home, and then getting yourself set up for that next purchase, whatever it might be, home or investment. Going for the maximum, because you don't have to use the whole of it, but you want to make sure that you can get in while you actually can. Otherwise things can change and then you can't do it anymore. And then lastly, chaos in construction. Of course, you know, it's just a crazy situation right now. But with every obstacle that comes up, you just got to find ways to overcome them.
Yep. Just manage it through and make the most out of it.
That's it. Thanks guys for joining for our webinar today. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please do come in and have a chat with us. We can take you through all of this in more detail, find out how it applies to you specifically, and if you are ready to get moving, then we can make that happen as well. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.